George Strait. The very name carries the weight of 1,000 stages, 1,000,000 hearts that have ever swayed to his voice, a legacy of country music that feels untouchable. But behind the sequined hats and the endless tours, behind the gold records and the roaring applause, there is a silence that no spotlight can reach, a silence filled with secrets and quiet heartbreak that the world has never seen. Tonight we step into that silence, into a story the headlines barely dare to whisper. For decades, George Strait was more than a singer. He was an icon, a symbol of steadfastness in a world that changes too fast. Yet even icons bleed, even legends fall, and what we are about to uncover is a truth so intimate, so raw, that it feels almost impossible to reconcile with the man who seemed untouchable. It began, as it often does, in the quiet corners of his life, away from the screaming fans and the flashing cameras. Friends close to him spoke of long nights sitting alone in his Texas ranch, the kind of nights where the whiskey sat untouched because even it couldn't quiet the thoughts. Those thoughts were of family, his children, his wife, and the enormous weight of regret that had never left him. He had spent years on the road, miles upon miles separating him from the people who mattered most, promising himself that the next tour, the next album, the next encore would make up for it. But the truth, as George would quietly confess to those few who dared listen, is that time has a cruel way of running out, and some moments cannot be reclaimed. In those private hours, he replayed words he wished he hadn't said, missed birthdays, forgotten school plays, and the inevitable realization that he had sacrificed pieces of himself for the dream that made him a star. There were whispers among insiders about health struggles that were carefully masked from the public eye. Crows, neck pain, fatigue, nights punctuated by shortness of breath that no one could see from the stage, not even during his legendary encores at arenas packed with thousands. Doctors close to him confirmed that while he maintained the appearance of vigor, there were serious moments of concern. Yet George's own words, rarely captured on camera, revealed a man torn between the desire to perform and the fear of the silence waiting for him at home. Those who loved him most, his children and his wife, watched him wrestle with this duality, feeling helpless as they witnessed the private toll of decades under a spotlight that demanded perfection, unwavering dedication, and a cheerful face, even when the heart was cracking. And then there were the regrets that haunted him most. Beyond health, beyond distance from family, there was the music itself and the choices made along the way. Friends close to the industry whispered of strained relationships with fellow legends, some public, some hidden in veiled interviews and quiet, unfinished conversations. George Strait, despite his fame and humility, had wrestled with feelings of jealousy, sorrow, and guilt. Fellow country stars, including Alan Jackson and Reba McEntire, noticed moments when his eyes seemed distant, haunted even, at award shows and after concerts, as if he were carrying a secret burden that no applause could lighten. There were moments, sources say, when he broke down in hotel rooms, when the walls of his private world seemed to close in, and tears flowed quietly for the mistakes that fame had made him commit, knowingly or unknowingly, or unknowingly. The heartbreak of his closest circle is a story rarely told. Family members describe nights when they would knock on the door of his private study, hearing nothing but the faint strum of a guitar and low murmurs, as George tried to reconcile the man he had become with the boy he once was in Petite, Texas. His own father's voice, long gone, was said to echo in his mind, reminders of the simpler life, the love of music untainted by millions of fans or industry pressures. And there were the words he could never say publicly, apologies to children he barely saw grow up, to friends who felt abandoned, and to himself for believing that success could replace presence, that applause could heal absence. Those moments of private remorse, sources close to him revealed, were profound, leaving him drained yet determined to continue the facade that the world adored. Even within the industry, George Strait carried a mysterious aura of unspoken stories. He had confided to a rare few that there were opportunities he never took, songs he refused to record and tours he canceled quietly, not for health or fame, but because of moral and personal dilemmas he could never voice aloud. Friends who spoke under anonymity revealed that he sometimes wept over lyrics he never sang, over messages he feared would alter the world's perception of him. And in those confessions, the sense of inevitability grew. inevitability that his private life, his true self, was a fragile glass world, beautiful yet vulnerable, always at risk of shattering under the gaze of an unrelenting public. Each decision, each performance, each smile carefully curated on stage carried the weight of hidden truths, a silent ledger of compromises and emotional scars no fan could ever witness. Beloved George Strait. The story deepens when we look at the private tragedies that no headline has dared to fully explore. Behind the stoic, calm demeanor, there were moments of unbearable loneliness. Family sources spoke of nights when he would sit in silence, staring at the walls of his sprawling home in San Antonio, Texas, haunted by memories of those he had lost along the way. Friends, mentors, even fellow performers who passed too soon. He had grown close to Waylon Jennings in the early years, a friendship that was more than music, more than collaboration. It was a lifeline. When Waylon passed, George reportedly spent hours alone, walking the ranch at night, whispering apologies to a man who had been more like a brother than anyone else. He would later confide that that loss left a hole in his chest that no success or awards could fill. There were moments of fear, too, moments when the fragility of life became unmistakably real. Sources close to George described a harrowing hospital visit years ago, one that was never publicized. A sudden scare with his heart left him shaken, realizing that his mortality was no longer an abstract thought, but a pressing, terrifying truth. It was during those nights in sterile hospital rooms, monitors beeping softly, that he whispered to his family things he had never voiced before. "I've given my life to music, but have I given enough to you?" The tears that night were unlike any performance, unscripted and raw, witnessed only by the ones he loved most. His wife, Anita Strait, described it as one of the rare times she saw him vulnerable in a way that shook her completely. A man whose voice could command thousands was now silently confronting the limits of his own body, his own choices, and the inevitable passage of time. Inevitable passage of time. Even his children felt the weight of hidden truths. His eldest, watching his father from the shadows of fame, often wondered about the man beneath the cowboy hat. Sources reveal whispered conversations in the middle of the night, fragments of apologies and confessions about dreams he never chased, regrets he could never undo, and words he hoped his children might understand when he was gone. And yet there were unspoken tensions, moments of unintentional hurt that fame inflicted. George Strait, the legend, had never wanted his life to be a burden, yet the very nature of stardom created invisible walls between him and those who mattered most. It is a truth that has never been fully told, that even the most revered figures carry a quiet ache that the world cannot measure. The music, always the music, was both sanctuary and trap. In interviews with his closest collaborators, producers whispered of sessions where George would pause mid-recording, his hands trembling, eyes distant, as though he were wrestling with ghosts only he could see. Songs that should have been joyful became confessional, carrying layers of regret, pain, and longing. One producer recalled a night recording a ballad that George had insisted on revising multiple times, finally stopping and saying, "This isn't just a song, it's everything I can't say." The room fell silent. It was the private George Strait speaking through his art, the voice of a man who had built an empire but never escaped the prison of his own conscience. And those closest to him understood that each note, each verse, was laden with a history of heartache, of sacrifices made silently and invisibly in service to an audience that only knew the legend, never the man. There were even moments when the weight of it all seemed too much. Friends and insiders whispered of emotional breakdowns in hotel rooms. Our buses, even in green rooms before performances. Tears that no one saw, hands pressed to his face, the stoic exterior giving way to a man quietly consumed by the enormity of his choices, his losses, and the relentless passage of time. And yet, the world never knew. The cameras captured only the calm, the smile, the hat tipped perfectly, the guitar strummed with effortless grace. But behind it all, George Strait was a man fighting an invisible battle, balancing love, regret, pain, and duty in a life the public could never fully grasp. And so the silence persists, a private narrative of sorrow, redemption, and mystery, one that has shadowed George Strait for decades. Behind the awards, the record-breaking tours, and the standing ovations, there is a story of a man wrestling with his own humanity, with family bonds strained by distance, with moments of illness that threaten to redefine everything, and with secrets never meant to leave the walls of his home. It is a story that the world rarely sees, yet it pulses in every song, every lyric, every note, a heartbeat beneath the legend that refuses to die. Refuses to die. Legendary George Strait. The shadows of his life are not limited to regrets or illness. There is a chapter many never imagined, one entwined with the darker corridors of fame, where friends say he faced betrayal and heartbreak in the most personal ways. Close associates reveal that early in his career, the price of stardom came with hidden dangers. Friendships strained to breaking, managers who saw dollar signs over loyalty, and industry figures whose charm masked calculated motives. He trusted, he gave, and more than once, he was left standing alone, heart heavy, wondering if the world of country music was as much a cage as it was a stage. Some of those betrayals were whispered to have cost him relationships he never replaced, leaving echoes of "what if" in the quietest hours of his nights. And there was one incident, never made public, that shook him to his core. A trusted confidant, someone George considered almost family, was discovered to be leaking details of his private life to tabloids, exploiting his every moment of vulnerability. The revelation devastated him. Friends say he retreated to his Texas ranch for weeks, cutting off even his closest circle, grappling with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. He confided only to a few, saying, "I built my life on trust, and trust betrayed me." In those weeks, he barely performed, barely spoke, barely smiled, and the man who seemed indestructible to millions showed the fragility of being human, the toll of exposing yourself so completely while the world watches, hungry for every detail. His family, too, bore the weight of these shadows. His children, now adults, grew up under a veil of public admiration, yet private caution, sensing the gravity in moments where George would retreat into himself. Nights spent on tour meant missed birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet bedtime stories that no camera could capture. He often carried a guilt so deep that insiders say he composed letters to his children he never sent. Apologies written in longhand, ink smudged with emotion, letters that detailed fears, hopes, and regrets he could not vocalize. His eldest son once described a rare conversation in which George said, voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to be everywhere for you, but I was never enough. I failed in ways you'll never see." Those words, haunting and tender, were spoken in the echo of a house filled with silence, leaving a mark that no success could erase. Even the music world felt his quiet battles. Fellow country stars noticed moments of emotional fragility during collaborations. George Jones, once a mentor and friend, reportedly counseled George in late-night phone calls, urging him to take care of himself, warning of the emotional and physical toll that relentless touring demanded. Yet George, in classic fashion, pressed forward, performing as if the stage were a sanctuary, though insiders say each note sometimes cost him dearly in private agony. The irony of a voice that could move millions also masking a man quietly bleeding inside was not lost on those who knew him best. Those who knew him best. And then, the whispers of illness returned, more ominous this time. Sources close to the family revealed subtle changes in his demeanor, shortened breaths between phrases, frequent pauses in rehearsals, nights awake with pain that no one else could see. Doctors spoke of preventive measures, yet George was said to refuse full disclosure, fearing it would overshadow the music, tarnish the legacy, and worry those he loved. Yet behind closed doors, he admitted in hushed tones, "I feel my strength slipping, but I won't let them see it." That duality, the public image of vitality and private struggle, became a defining shadow of his later years. Each performance was a testament to courage, yet each backstage retreat whispered of a man at war with his own body, with mortality, and with the price of living as a legend. And finally, there is a story of last words, moments of confessions that never reached the public. George Strait, in quiet hours, shared with only a trusted few his fear that fame had stolen pieces of his soul, that the life he loved had demanded more than it gave. "I am proud," he said, voice breaking, "but I am tired, and I wish I could have done more for the people who matter most." Those words, fragile and human, reveal a man who, despite the myth, carried wounds unseen, regrets unspoken, and a longing for peace that no award could ever grant. In the silence of his private world, George Strait lived, suffered, and loved in ways the public could only glimpse, his humanity hidden beneath the legend. Respected George Strait. Even as the years pressed on, the weight of hidden truths never eased. Sources close to him speak of moments when the stage, once a sanctuary, became a mirror reflecting the life he could not fully reclaim. There were nights after performances when he would linger in empty arenas, staring at the seats, imagining the faces of his children as toddlers, imagining conversations he should have had, apologies he should have whispered. Friends say he would sometimes return to his hotel room, remove his iconic hat, and sit in silence, letting the exhaustion and grief wash over him. In those moments, he was not the king of country, not the record-breaking legend, but simply George. Fragile, haunted, and painfully aware of the consequences of choices made decades earlier. And yet there were moments of clandestine joy, fleeting but profound. Family insiders recall secret trips with his children, spontaneous weekends at the beach, quiet dinners away from prying eyes, where he laughed freely, without pretense. Those moments were precious, brief reprieves from the shadow of fame and the burden of legacy. But even then, there was an undercurrent of melancholy, a subtle reminder that time is finite, and every memory carries the weight of what was lost along the way. "I treasure these moments," he reportedly whispered to his wife, "because they are the only ones that are truly mine." Those words, tender and raw, capture the heart of a man balancing love, regret, and the relentless demands of a public life that never sleeps. His confidants also reveal a deep connection to music beyond performance and almost spiritual intimacy. Late at night, he would retreat to a private studio, guitar in hand, writing songs he never intended to release. Some were letters to his family, some were confessions of pain, some were reflections on fleeting fame and enduring regret. One such song, never recorded for the public, was described as a haunting melody of longing and apology, capturing a man's remorse for years spent absent, for moments that could never be reclaimed. "This is the only way I can speak," he confided to a producer, "because words alone are not enough." Those private compositions, hidden away, remain a testament to the inner life of a man whose public image was one of perfection, but whose private world was saturated with vulnerability and sorrow. Vulnerability and sorrow.